people say forgive and forget. It's like, forgive, don't forget. You know, you need to learn, right?
Yeah.
That's how you learn.
I forgot about this important lesson, these important standards that I should be holding myself to. And then I'm not holding myself to those standards right now.
If something is relevant to somebody that you're talking to, you should say it. Otherwise, you are gaslighting yourself into thinking that that's not important.
You need good relationships, people that are going to keep you accountable.
Yeah.
And that are not just going to fade away because
They didn't like what you said.
they didn't
you know?
like what you said.
Don't lie, and people say, oh, well, what if it's not hurting anybody? It's hurting you. You're confusing yourself. And if you can't be honest with yourself about the truth about what you're thinking or what you're feeling or what's important, of course you're going to be confused.
You need a
I think people these days have been struggling a lot more with just remembering. People have been reporting higher levels of just not being able to like recall life events and just like being able to feel like, oh, what did I do yesterday? Or just like, what did I eat for breakfast today? You know, those sorts of things. I've noticed that in myself too. And I think that it makes a lot of sense given that our brains need some way of crafting a narrative, and what that narrative is predetermined by is our goal function and our paradigm. What do we care about? What do we prioritize? And everybody needs to prioritize something because we have to figure out what do we do now in this moment above everything else, right? And that inherently has some kind of prioritization structure, even if it's unintentional, right? And I think that can be really difficult because it's so hard to determine nowadays what is relevant, what is important. And we have so many things that are presented to us as relevant and important that are definitely not.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, that's what everyone's trying to do, you know. It's like on every thumbnail, it's like, oh my goodness, this thing happened. Even
including ours.
Including ours.
We believe what we're talking about is relevant and important,
oh my goodness,
which is why we're talking about it, right?
That's true.
And so I think that, you know, that's kind of the point is like, okay, you come here to hear about what we find to be relevant and important, right? And I think that can be really difficult, especially because that can be changing all the time, especially because we have all these social media feeds that give us random stuff that we don't choose to think about that is messing with our whole understanding of what's relevant and important, because you're constantly getting a million things that, like, your brain is so confused. Why did we just hear about it? Why are we thinking about this, right?
It can seem like it's changing all the time because it's like every day the news is different. This new thing happened. Did you hear this? This thing happened. Right. It's like, oh my god, again, you know.
Right. Yeah, and it's so interesting because it's like what's happening with these like celebrities and famous people is all of a sudden so relevant to us, even though we don't know who they are, and it doesn't have any impact on us.
It seems relevant because you're thinking about it all the time. Because it's constantly being brung to your attention. It's like, I watched this YouTube video and it was about Matt Diabella. He's actually a very popular YouTube channel. He's pretty well known. He has a few million subscribers, and then he was basically talking about how he quit the news. And like, actually a few people have been quitting the news and like saying like, it's just like, you feel like you're informed, but it's not actually relevant to your day-to-day life a lot of the time. And usually if it is super relevant, you're gonna hear from it, hear about it, and you're gonna actually feel the impact, and it's gonna be brought to your attention naturally.
Yeah, well, it's funny because we had some friends in India who were like, did you hear about the California fires? And we're like, no, because we don't watch the news, and so all these people in a different country are like telling us about this event, which you know is still like we don't live in California, so it's not very.
We would probably know if we were in California. And it's like, but they're finding out about it in India, and it's like when we were in China, we were talking to one of our cousins, and apparently he was learning a lot about racial discrimination and the problems that's going on TikTok.
And we're like, hey man, this is not relevant. You're in China. There's only Chinese people. And so
for the vast majority of people in China are Chinese people, you know.
Vast majority.
Vast majority. So it's like, do you really need to be worried about racial discrimination at the moment?
Yeah, you know? Well, I think it's just so confusing because you have all of these global issues being brought up and presented as incredibly relevant and important. Not to say that global issues aren't relevant and important sometimes. Yeah. But it's still like, I think people are very confused as to what is that framework for determining that. There's really really no through line as to what is the principle here in terms of how we're making these decisions, right? Like with social media, it's just an algorithm maximizing engagement, right? Well, there's really no understanding of how to determine what's important and relevant. And because of that, if that's constantly changing, if you're constantly being confused, how are you supposed to remember anything, right? Because you have all these kids in school that are like there's all these memorization hacks for all this stuff that isn't, that you don't know how it's relevant and important, and then you're like trying to cram it in your brain and remember these things. So I think of course it's so confusing as to our brain to try to think, what do I remember, and compared to some super emotionally charged things on the news, of course you're not going to remember what you had for breakfast. Right?
Even though that's actually what's relevant to you. So it's like because your brain's confused as to what's relevant and what's not. That's what these things are doing. Is you think that the California fires in California are super relevant, and you're talking about it even though you live in India.
Right.
And it's like, so it's like your brain's confused as to what's relevant, and what's relevant to your brain is the things that you're going to remember. That's how your brain can tell what are you actually going to remember. And a lot of the time it's emotional. What actually causes an emotional reaction is what causes you to remember that thing. And you can only, like, there's a limited range of the actual emotions that you can feel. That and it's not just like linear of like the more intense things are going to cause 10 times the amount of like emotional, like you can only
respond
feel
to stubbing your toe,
So it's like, which can be confusing because it's like you can actually numb yourself to a lot of things by constantly bringing these very emotionally charged topics to your mind, where it's like
then your baseline adjusts to extremely shocking, disturbing things that you're seeing, and then the sorts of things that are happening in your day-to-day life that are probably a lot more relevant to you
can feel just numb, like this is not causing any emotional. So you kind of want to, that's why people are doing these like detoxes and stuff, where it's like, oh, I'm gonna quit social media because I want to feel something again. It's something that and I was like, oh, okay,
can I get my emotions back? So of course, this is a very extreme sort of environment that we're being exposed to now. And I think that part of also what we've been thinking about is like, how do you have a consistent narrative? Because that's actually hard, because to have a consistent narrative is to have accountability. Because if you have some sort of like, this is what I care about, and then something goes wrong and you make a mistake, and you have a consistent understanding of what's good and what was the ideal way for you to respond in a certain situation, you're not always going to meet that standard, and then you're going to have to be like, oh, I made a mistake. That's how we learn, right? Yeah, exactly. And that's really important to have some sort of consistent baseline of how do I determine what's important and what's good.
And we've definitely met people where they're how they determine what's good and like how they determine what's relevant and important
just switches so all the time
of like, and their identity, and they're probably not even completely aware of it themselves because they just push it, you're just going to push it out of your mind.
Right, yeah. It's a lot easier if, I cared about this thing, but then I wasn't disciplined enough to get good at it. And then it's way easier to just think, I don't care about that anymore. Instead of,
I have a new identity now.
Like, I'm going to do this other thing.
We met someone who was like, they were talking about something very specific that they were like, this is my whole identity. I've learned so much about this.
Right.
And then a month goes by, it switched to being an actor or something like that. And then month go by, and then it's something else. And it's like, okay, what is going on here? And I'm guessing they
with
don't,
seemingly no awareness of how this was like confusing and switching around.
If you're switching around a bunch, it's going to be harder to keep long-term relationships.
Yeah, you're going to switch who you're hanging out with and what you're talking about and all those sorts of things.
And if you have a really solid long-term relationship, you're probably not going to be switching around as much because you have that accountability.
Right.
And that's
of just like, hey, weren't you just talking about this other thing a month ago? Right. And it doesn't help that your social media feed is just going to change immediately to whatever this new thing is about.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
That's true.
It's just you immediately just get that a whole new thing and you don't even know, right? And so I think that that's something that we've been seeing is how do you establish that consistency? That's one thing that we talked about in terms of you want to know about what are the kind of consistent factors that can keep you grounded. One of those is long-term relationships. That's definitely very important. One is being able to, we talked about how Taekwondo was that in our life and how we kind of intentionally are seeing, hey, this is a constant variable that allows us to put everything else in perspective, right?
That's the very consistent things that we've been doing for now years. It's the same studio.
A decade for me.
Yeah, it's wow, you're old.
I'm so old. Yeah.
I'm 7 years. I'm old too.
Yeah.
Well, it can seem like that if you're talking about things you've been doing for years,
right?
But like, it's something it's the same studio, same instructors, pretty much, and then same sort students and they
same environment, same goal, and that's really important because we have that accountability and we have that grounding variable in our lives that allows us to, in kind of relation to that, we can see that there's sorts of other different stages, and if we change, we can be more aware of that because the people around us are like, hey, you're acting differently, right? And I think that is really important to be able to do, but you kind of have to set yourself up for that. And I think one important way is to be honest, because I think that that's part of what can so easily kind of just snowball into this sort of just being so completely blind and unaware of all these sorts of things that you can be so far removed from anything that's grounding you to any sort of consistent understanding of yourself and your life and what's important. Right?
Well, the reason why you need to be honest, because I think the main thing here to keep you from going down that of like not being honest and just switching and like not learning is you need relationships. You need good relationships that are gonna people that are gonna keep you accountable. And that are not just gonna fade away because they're not
because they didn't like what you said.
Because they didn't like what you said. Family is a great place to start, and I'm talking from like a very easy point of view because I have Zooming and like our family dynamic is very strong. And so, but I have noticed like that's very, very important for me, keeping a good headspace of like, I talk to you about my emotions and like where I'm at and what I'm feeling, and then I put it into words, and even just having someone where I can be honest about that, and just be like, and have the courage to just like say like I did something stupid.
Right.
And
I think
that's a huge weight off.
And already it's extremely hard to say that, but then to not have people where you feel very comfortable to say that, right? Because it's already such a big barrier, obviously, to say like, oh, I did this stupid thing, right? Obviously you don't want to think about it, right? But that's part of why it's like, of course you're going to have memory issues. If every time you make a mistake and do something stupid, you push it out of your mind, you try to forget, right? Of course, it's going to be really hard for you to try to have some kind of consistent understanding of what you should remember, because it is very important to remember your mistakes, right? Because it's like people say forgive and forget. It's like forgive, don't forget, you need to learn, right? That's how you learn. And I think that that's really important to understand how you can really be able to triangulate that reality by being honest, by being authentic. Not to say that you need to like share everything with everybody all the time, right? But it's about, if something is relevant to somebody that you're talking to, you should say it, because it's otherwise you are kind of gaslighting yourself into thinking that that's not important when it's not the case, and you're just confusing yourself. And that's why it's so important. People say like, it's like, don't lie. And people say, oh, well, what if it's not hurting anybody? It's hurting you. You're confusing yourself. And if you can't be honest with yourself about the truth about what you're thinking or what you're feeling or what's important, of course you're going to be confused.
You need to have a stable idea of like, what is reality, because if you do something that's easy because it's easy and it was it kept you from having to confront something about yourself, or it kept you from having to maybe face something important but uncomfortable, then it's really, that's a slippery slope. I mean, you do that thing and then all of a sudden that's the norm. And then you can do another thing that's easy and not honest with yourself and not honest with other people. And then that's the norm. And it just keeps going down. And so and if you're not actually talking about it or writing it down or seeing it in some, as like a third person and trying to look at it from a objective point of view, then it's just the norm in your mind.
Yeah.
And so there's no way of getting out of that without trying to look at it from a different perspective. And that means talking to someone, even if it's uncomfortable, and saying, I did this, or I feel this way, or maybe I don't think this was a good thing to do.
Even if they're not receptive to it, you're doing it a lot in large part for yourself.
Yeah.
Right. And that's one thing that one strategy that our family kind of employed, which I think is really helpful. I think other people should try to do in a way that can really help to ground yourself in terms of memory, is documenting things, because we have so many writings, we have so many videos, we did all these like live streams and podcasts and things that were really just for ourselves, and it was really helpful to us to look back, a year ago this is what we were thinking, and being like, oh, that was so stupid, why did we think that?
Painfully obvious when you screwed up.
And it was so great because I'd be watching a podcast from a year ago and be like, oh, that's what we were thinking, and otherwise I would have totally forgot. And that's really important, to humble yourself of I was so limited, I was so blind to this before.
And when you actually, and not just before, but like you might be screwing up now, and then if you're documenting your point of view earlier, you can be like, actually learn from your past self.
Right.
Like look through that and be like, oh, right, I forgot about that.
Right.
I forgot about this important lesson and these important standards that I should be holding myself to.
Right.
And then I'm not holding myself to those standards right now. They make sense, but I just forgot about them.
Yeah, I mean, because you're going to go through periods of clarity, and you're going to go through periods where you're more confused, and to be able to see your past self was like maybe very clear about something, and then you kind of forgot, and then being able, like, I've been looking back and being like, oh yeah, I already know this, like, why am I not doing this, right? And it's so easy to kind of forget about those things and forget about the lessons that you've learned when you're forgetting everything that happened, and of course, as we mentioned in the beginning, it's like, there's a lot of reasons why we're very confused about what's relevant, and that's causing us to forget a lot of things, right? But at the same time, there's a lot you can do in terms of being honest and documenting, and also knowing that you need that accountability, right? And taking those intentional steps to create it for yourself, even though it's going to be painful, right? But I think
keeping the relationships that are going to keep you in check.
And that's so much of what humanity has created in terms of like societal structures and institutions, is just having some more like clear defined environment, so you can have that accountability, so you can be confronted with the things that you said that you would do and then maybe you didn't do, and it's like those sorts of basic things are really hard, they're simple, but they're hard, right? And there's a lot of things.
And it doesn't seem simple when you're living through them.
Yeah, of course, and it's really hard to know exactly when they apply, but I think that that's part of, what we're thinking about as what is the mechanism, the mechanism of honesty, the mechanism of having people around you, the mechanism of documenting and being able to look back on, oh wow, I was really stupid about this one thing, and now I know better, and I should remember that I used to not know that, so I can not make those mistakes again, right? And that's really, really important, and it's also really, really hard, but I think that being able to think about what is it that I can set up in my environment to make it not so hard, right? That would be better. And to have people around you that make it not so hard.
Come up with things that are regular and scheduled that can bring you back. Like if you have to take initiative, you're not going to take initiative to do those really good things when you're not in a good headspace.
Yeah. So
one thing I was actually talking to our mom about was that I was like, wow, if I have, a regular touch point with these things where I have to face it and have an example of something I can do better. Like maybe, talking to you every day and then having those regular checkups with myself and those regular examples of like, this is how I can do better,
right,
is gonna make a world of difference.
Yeah.
Because it just keeps you from going down that slippery slope.